my cousin was an alumni of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Mm.
And shortly after the school shooting there in 2018, I got a call from him and he said, "Hey, you know that school shooting in Florida?" I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that was my school. A couple of kids are doing a music video and they have another person from Hollywood who was also an alumna coming in to direct it, but they could use some producing help. Do you want in?" And I was like, yes. You know, what the world was seeing was March for Our Lives and these students who were being portrayed as heroes, and they were, right?
Right.
But there were thousands of other kids who were
Right.
feeling like, we are not heroes, we are not survivors, we don't know what we are hurting. And what these students were primarily doing was creating.
You're listening to Creativity Unconfined. Stay tuned to learn about how the arts unlock the doors for those who are imprisoned.
Greetings. My name is, as ever, Dave Gussack, and I remain the director for the Florida State University Institute for the Arts and Art Therapy with the Imprisoned. And this is yet another exciting episode of Creativity Unconfined. Today, we get to talk to Jane Bloom. Now, I've known Jane Bloom for several years, and we're going to hear during this podcast of how I got a chance to really get to know her and work with her. But here's who Jane is. Jane Bloom is a two-time national Emmy-winning producer, co-founder of The Oz Effect, and a member of the Producers Guild of America. Lately, that trouble has been expanding into immersive and experiential work, including The Unit, a short-form audio documentary series featuring first-person testimony from survivors of solitary confinement. She traveled to over 30 countries on every inhabited continent and once survived a lion bite in Thailand. Quite frankly, I'm just excited to bring her on board here. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Jane to the stage. Jane,
Hello.
how are you?
Hello.
Oh my
I'm
goodness.
great. So excited to be a part of your gossip podcast. I
That's all
brought
we're
my
going to do.
tea.
See, we got our tea. So, we're just going to kibitz over our tea. That makes me excited. This is my excited face. So,
As usual.
as indeed. So, oh, there's so much to unpack here. First off, I'm gonna hold off on the lion bite because I want to know about this. But
It's not
tell
as exciting as it seems.
you can't put lion and bite in the same sentence and not okay. You know what? Let's get it out of the way now. Well, you're saying it's not as exciting as it sounds. I'm saying, look, my thing is I think you're lying. All right,
That was
talk
going to
to me.
happen at some point.
I had to so let's get that out of the way. What are you talking about? I've known you for 3 years. Never once have I heard about this lion bite. What is this about?
Well, it's really funny because that came from another bio that was actually written by a friend of mine. We were working on another project together and heard this story before and was like, "Oh, we've got to put it in your bio." And I'm like, "Okay." I'll back up a little bit. When I was living in Los Angeles, I was kind of at like the point of my career that I felt was like a really beautiful pinnacle. I had like at that point I had won the Emmys. I was on an executive track at a very popular production company, and I had sort of been there towards the beginning. And I had the house and the car and the fiance and all of those things. But I wasn't feeling like super fulfilled as it goes.
Mhm.
And so my husband and I decided that we would like pull the ultimate eat, pray, love, and we would go quit our jobs and get married. And then our honeymoon would be basically traveling for 3 months. We were going to backpack in Costa Rica. And then 3 months turned into almost 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and as part of that, I had always had this like love of animals, and so
Hmm.
we both got to kind of pick what we did and where we went, and we were totally off the grid for most of it. And some of our travels landed us for I think the second or third time at that point in Thailand, where we got the opportunity to be at this wild, wild animal, what we thought was an animal sanctuary.
Hmm.
And we got there and it was basically a zoo.
Huh.
And what they would do is they would they would basically get tourists like us to come in and like pay money to like help with like the animal enrichment. And so they allowed totally untrained people to come in and like work with the big cats.
They paid you to work for them.
No, we paid them to work.
I mean, you paid them. You paid them so that you could work for them.
So that we could work for them. Right?
Ooh, sounds like it sounds like my students here.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Sometimes it's like that in entertainment too.
That's right.
So we get to this place, and it is, I cannot even tell you, we could have a whole podcast on it. It was like Lord of the Flies. It was just like, mostly, wealthier white tourists from all over the world staying in these like little bunkers. We had been on the road at that point for a while and had been really off the grid. So we were used to it. I worked in conservation television, so I was used to the animal husbandry part of it. But it's wild because you're working with these big cats. Now you can only work with them. You had to go through like certain training to work with the older ones. But we were working with like leopards and lions. And I think, I don't know if when I was there were not baby tigers, I don't think.
Okay.
But yes, so one of the days I was with basically a 6-month lion, which is bigger than a German Shepherd and much more powerful. And she was just playing, and she came at me and she bit like right on my, and the thing is that when they bite to play, they just bite. When they bite to kill, they rip. They bite and they rip. So if she had ripped, I would not have survived because it was that big of a chunk. But she didn't. I just had these like huge puncture wounds.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just, that's why I said it's not as exciting as you think. I wasn't.
No, I'm sorry. That's you can't underplay that. You got bit by a lion. I don't care what size. That's my goodness.
But it was wild. Like we would have like, those big like rawhide dog bones. But they would like put like this minced raw meat over top and allow tourists to go in and like hold these bones. It was like you got there and you're like, this is the craziest shit I've ever seen. Like, I can't believe that this happens. There's a whole backstory of how the program got started because they wanted more.
That's maybe another episode.
Animals, we don't have time for that. But that is my
That's a wonderful transition story. Because we often talk about origin stories. That sounds like a great transition story because I think that demarcates the split between what you were before, this high-powered producer in California and LA, doing all these TV shows, winning these Emmy Awards, to where you are now, which is advocating for those that have become that are disenfranchised and quite frankly are locked up literally to be forgotten. And so let's talk about that transition. You mentioned it in passing. What was the impetus of that? What made you stop and think, I'm not getting fulfilled here. This is the direction I'm going to go in. And then we're going to get into how did we meet? I have no memory. You're going to have to fill me in on that.
I'll see if I can remember. Well, yeah, I think a lot of people who end up in the creative fields, especially, probably theater as well, but especially in Hollywood, you have all these dreams, you grow up, lots of us were theater kids, lots of us were artists in other ways. And you think, I'm going to go and I'm going to change Hollywood and I'm going to do this thing, and you get out there and you have to work, and you have to make money and you have to do these things. And there's a lot that's very fulfilling day to day because day to day, you are solving complex problems. You are trying to figure out how to get a creative vision out of your mind or somebody else's mind and then get that onto screen and all the logistics that come between that. How much is it going to cost? How many cameras do you need? What type of cameras do you need? How many rehearsal spaces do you need? All of the things. And so the day-to-day of it can be very fulfilling because you, in some ways, constantly feel like you're in a war zone. Once everything's done, you feel like you've gotten through it. And so you build these incredible bonds. But it's also really exhausting. So sometimes you look back and you're like, wow, like to the outside world, it feels like I'm living the dream. And at the end of the day, yeah, I'm proud of the stuff. I'm proud of some of the stuff I produced. But at the time that I sort of left Hollywood, we were doing really great social impact work for major broadcast networks. And they were wonderful, like National Geographic, Discovery Channel style programming. And some of them I look back on, I'm like, wow, this was really great. But they were still very orange juice. They were still very surface level. And like, as you can see, I'm like a dark and moody person.
I see that. I've come to understand that.
So yeah, there was just something where it was like, in order to really truly create the things you want to create and to get them on the air in a big way is just something that is not guaranteed. And you can work on something. For example, Sopranos took 12 years to sell and almost didn't. Breaking Bad almost never got on the air, right? So there's just no guarantee. You can have some of the best ideas in the world and they may never see the light of day. And it's exhausting after a decade or more in the industry. And yeah, so we kind of took off on this adventure, and it was really difficult. It was I actually went through a pretty severe depression through it, because I was always Jane the producer. My whole value, my whole worth was, first, Jane's the girl who got accepted into art school. Okay, Jane's the girl who got accepted into film school. Oh, Jane's the girl who went to Hollywood and made it. Jane's the girl who won the Emmys. Stripped of all of that, I didn't know really who I was, to a certain degree. I knew I loved to travel. I knew I loved people. I knew I loved art. And we did the round the world trip, which is again another podcast in and of itself. And it was really eye-opening. We went to a lot of war-torn places that were recovering from war. Went to a lot of places where there is current conflict, although we were never in like true immediate danger. And when I came back at the time we came back to Maryland because it was the holidays. And so we were always, a few weeks away from going back to Los Angeles. And, every time someone would reach out to me for a position, it would be a great position, a supervising producer or an EP or something like that, or maybe another executive job. But it always just felt like I can't. I felt like I couldn't do it, and I couldn't figure out why. And I was struggling to find what I wanted to produce at that point. And I fell into, it just so happened that my cousin was an alumni of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. And shortly after the school shooting there in 2018, I got a call from him, and he said, "Hey, that school shooting in Florida?" I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that was my school. A couple of kids are doing a music video, and they have another person from Hollywood who was also an alumna coming in to direct it, but they could use some producing help. Do you want in?" And I was like, yes. I wasn't doing anything else other than trying to figure out what I was doing. Right. And so I came down to Parkland, and we produced this music video. At the time, this was about a month after the shooting. At the time, there was no media allowed on campus. And so we were really the only media allowed on campus. And we produced this music video. But while I was down there, as it relates to you, what I was seeing is that these students who were suffering so much were creating. And not just the theater students. I was primarily at that point with the theater students. So of course they're creating. But across the board, what the world was seeing was March for Our Lives and these students who were being portrayed as heroes, and they were, right?
Right.
But there were thousands of other kids who were feeling like, we are not heroes. We are not survivors. We don't know what we are. We are hurting. And what these students were primarily doing was creating. And they didn't want to talk to grown-ups. They didn't want to talk to adults. They wanted therapy dogs and horses, and they wanted to talk to each other. And I think because I was short and younger looking men with blue hair, I kind of fit in a little bit more than the average adult. And we would be sitting there and, these kids would be talking about oh, I have this new crush, and look at my new kicks, and oh, that's where I hid when the shooter came in. All in one sentence.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so I saw this, and at the time I reached out to an old friend of mine from high school. Her name is Megan, and she was at the time the head of global advertising for the New York Times. And I hadn't talked to her in 18 years. But all I knew was that she was big in social media. And I said, we have this music video. It's gotten a lot of attention from Scooter Braun on down, but I know nothing about social media. What do we do with it? And she said, well, that's crazy shit. I was going to reach out to you because I'm quitting my job to become a filmmaker. And she said, and by the way, you should talk to my best friend, Jessica, who was also somebody I went to school with. And I said, yeah, I know Jessica's doing something, some kind of drama therapy. What the hell is drama therapy? And at the time, I knew nothing about drama therapy.
Yeah.
And so I connected with Jessica and I said, listen, I see what's happening here. I see what these kids are doing and how they're reacting to this, and they're creating art but they don't want therapy. All of the adults were coming to me and saying, like, they don't want therapy. What do we do? I don't know. I'm a producer. But I said to Jessica, can you put structure around this? Can you take what you do in the arts and put structure around this? And she said, yeah. And so we co-created this program that was basically taking the tenets of like group therapy and creative arts therapy. So music, art, we did music, art, and drama therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So we did not, movement was in the drama, but we did not have a movement therapist.
Okay.
And we created a camp where some of the surviving students could go, and some of the victims' families and things like that. And that experience changed my life. Even though I was not in the sessions, I was always there in the opening and the closing. And I was very, very involved in the outreach. I was the one reaching out to parents and students and talking to people and trying to get them to sign up and all of that. And I saw with my own eyes what was happening, what these students would come in as and what the parents would come in as, and then what they would leave with, right? And the type of connection to themselves and to others and even to their grief that we were seeing.
Was this Camp Shine?
This was Camp Shine.
Okay.
And so that was my first like direct experience with anything creative arts therapy. And I became obsessed. And that's actually what led me into the prison work. I really became obsessed with this study of, as an artist, you always know arts are powerful.
Right.
But I didn't realize there was this whole like world of work out there where scientists were trying to prove what we already know. And they were studying the brain and studying the ways in which the work that you do has real effect on the brain and has real effect on mental health, physical health, and all these things. And so I took this big, deep rabbit hole, and I worked with Jessica a lot more, and some of the other therapists. One of them you actually know, Alicia, who's an incredible art therapist in Parkland.
Oh, yeah, but yes,
she's wonderful. But yeah, so I took this deep dive. In the meantime, because of the experience of Camp Shine, what I realized I wanted to do was take everything I knew about producing, because Camp Shine wasn't filmed, right? But I realized that I was able to create something really special that had nothing to do with the camera. They wanted cameras. We said no.
Okay.
And I realized, I can spend a decent portion of my time really giving back to society because I have all these skills from having been a producer, because producers can do damn near anything, right? Because you always have to do something, right? I don't even know what to say a producer does other than like get it done.
Okay, Malaya and Sydney, please make a note of that.
Well, and that especially in factual television, your entire job is to go into communities, find the story, connect with the people, find what's really going on, and then figure out how to tell it in the most ethical way possible, unless you're working for reality TV, and then you try to tell it in the most unethical way possible.
Yeah.
So I got really involved in that. I started doing a lot of social impact work, and I was hired by Unlock the Box, which is the national campaign against solitary confinement, to come in and sort of help with their messaging and their website and their comms. Like, how do we take this very like niche, what feels niche subject, and make it look better on the internet, make us be able to talk about it better, etc. I knew nothing about solitary confinement.
Right.
I knew it was bad, but like nothing. I'm a leftist, so like mass incarceration bad, but have no direct experience myself,
Mm-hmm.
But in getting the position, getting the contract, I had to do a lot of work, and I had to do a lot of research on it. And as I couldn't unsee at that point, I couldn't unsee what I had seen.
It's powerful. Yeah.
Incredibly powerful. And it's, one of the things we say all the time is that the barbed wire and the guard towers are not there to keep people in. They are there to keep you out. They're there to keep the public out. Because if the average person, even the most tough on crime person, really truly knew what happened behind prison walls and the people who are behind them, because they're not monsters. Most of them are not the monsters that you see on
Right.
TV or that you think you see, right? Most of them are victims of abuse,
Right.
are
Well,
parts
all
of
of them have
us.
experienced some level of trauma, and
100%.
they're just perpetuating that same cycle of trauma.
100%. And if we as a society don't recognize that, that's the thing, right? Is everybody loves to, you know, um, vilify a molester. And yes, horrible. If something happened like that to my child, we're horrified. But 9.9 times out of 10, that molester was once a victim.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
if we as a society cannot come to terms with that and just shut it down and call people bad and call people monsters, we ain't never going to get anywhere. And that's the part that was part of what I couldn't unsee. The other part was the abuse, was the true culture of corrections and the culture, solitary confinement specifically, how it's so emblematic of a system that is meant to dehumanize. It's never about not having people in prison. They want these people back. So yeah, that's really how it kind of all shifted for me, is that it really started with the unease that a lot of people feel when they're in Hollywood. And I had the privilege to be able to leave it behind. A lot of people don't, but I did have the privilege to be able to leave it behind. And then just through a chance, a coincidence of, being able to be a part of what was happening in Parkland, I really came upon, the creative arts and, the creative arts therapies. And I still, to this day, I mean, I can nerd out on it all day. Let's go.
Well, we have time to nerd out on it. I love that concept. And then we cross paths, and primarily because um, there was a post that I had written about art that had come out of solitary confinement. It was a woman that
Mhm.
had been placed in seclusion. There's an image right here we can show you, and I think this is the piece um, that you had
Mhm.
first seen, and you had reached out, and I think that became the symbol of how do we cross the bars? How do we cross over the
Yeah.
barriers that are put in place? And the way it's done is through the art that's collected by those that are inside and how they react and respond to what they went through. For the person who's driving on I-95 and hearing this through their radio, Jane, can you describe this piece, particularly in your words? Because this is the piece that, if I recall, this is what was this impacted you to feel a need to reach out and speak with me.
Yeah, I mean, the piece it looks like it's textured, like it's made out of paint, or maybe there was some finger painting involved, but it's on the left side is bright pink, and on the right side it's mostly black with a little bit of green and pink. And it almost looks like there's prison bars in the background over top of all of this color that is sort of like a whirlwind. And then in the middle is a figure of a person. It's kind of androgynous and it's all black, and they're like hunched over, touching their head, and they are almost like coming out of the bars. The bars don't actually cross them. So you can't actually tell whether you are in a cell with them or if their soul is coming out of the cell in some way.
Yeah.
And then their body is all kind of morphed, almost as like if it's like folding in on itself. There's a lot of movement in the piece, a lot of texture in the piece. And it's really just one of those pieces that at first, like, you see the figure, but you don't exactly know what you're looking at. But when
Mhm.
you find out the backstory that this was created by somebody who was in solitary confinement, if you know anything about solitary confinement, then it becomes even more powerful.
And I think what's significant is that it's while you see those images as bars, I see them as claw marks, as if
Mm.
had dug her fingers into this paint and pulled them down.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is why I get the chills when I've seen this. And I've seen this piece in person. This was actually done at a nearby women's prison. It was in a session led by one of my former students who was an art therapist there, and this was done by somebody who had spent many months in seclusion and had come out and was dealing with the ramifications and the mental health impact of what it was like to be in solitary, and how she was so disconnected from everyone around her, and how essentially what she conveyed was that this is how she feels all the time. She feels
Yeah.
closed off and constrained, and just really overwhelmed by all of the sensory input that's happening all around her. And so it really is, for me, has been emblematic of what seclusion and solitary looks like. We have lots and lots of images of those who are spend time in isolation, but to me, this is the one that really captures it perfectly. So when you reached out and said, "Can we use this piece? Can we?" And that's when I was like, "Well, we need to talk."
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like that one email was the culmination of everything kind of coming together. Because I remember the reason I reached out was because at the time I was looking to build the library of work that was coming out of solitary,
Hmm.
and to find a way to pay some artists, but also be able to use the artwork in some of our communications and things. I saw that, of course, clicked on it, saw your blog, read the blog, and the art,
You
the
were one
creative
of the
art.
12 people. Thank you.
There's like at least 13. Um,
Okay.
but like the creative arts therapy side of my brain, the neuro art side was like, this dude is fascinating. And then obviously, like the prison side of my brain is like, this dude is fascinating. And then I read all the way down, and then there's like this little bio at the bottom. And it's like, and he's the author of the book Art on Trial. And then the producer side of my brain is like, Art on Trial? What? This guy is amazing. And so I remember calling my creative partner Alexandra up in the Oz Effect, and I was like, look, I know we don't have time for any more projects, but hear me out. And I sent it to her, and I was like, I'm 99% sure we need to reach out to this guy, and we did. And I immediately got a reply back that was like, no, I don't have time for you. Uh, it was an automatic reply, but
Okay.
that was the beginning. That was like the beginning of like all the exploration.
Oh my goodness. I want to that as much as I can spend as much time as I want about the mutual adoration. That's wonderful. I do want to backtrack just a little bit because I'm fascinated by one segment of this, and I want to put this in a context because I'm realizing now that you worked with those that were targeted at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School by someone who clearly, um, it was horrific and horrible, and we've demonized this monstrous figure that did this, and we do that with everybody that does these shootings.
Yeah.
And here we have empathy for the victims of and those that were left behind during this process. And then we flash forward a couple of years, and now you're working with the very people that are locked up, that are those that we deem and label criminal, and we label them as the monsters of our society. And how do I ask this? How do you reconcile such a shift between working with the victims of such criminals and working with those themselves, who they themselves, many of them, have pulled the trigger and
Right.
targeted someone?
Right. It's a lot easier now than it used to be.
Okay.
Um, but I think even back then, after, pre the work I was doing in prison and post the Parkland work or during the Parkland work, um, I always felt an empathy with the shooter as well, because any photo that you saw of this young man, he was a child.
Yeah.
He's like 100 pounds soaking wet,
Yeah.
you know, and no child should have access to a weapon like that without all kinds of guardrails. Obviously, like the school had an RAF, and but all of that, there's a lot of guardrails there. I don't know if it's called RAF, but
You're right.
maybe it's ROTC. But um, the way that I look at it, and again, it's tough because I've sat in the rooms, the literal bedrooms of some of these children who are never coming home. You know, I've drank whiskey with their parents and, you know, sat with those families who've lost somebody. And at the same time, I look at this as like the system failed those families, those students, and they failed the shooter too. The what that young person endured and what the demons that he was dealing with inside his head and his body manifested in a horrible tragedy. And not that he should not be held accountable, right? And this is, you know, these are obviously like the big horrific acts, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that he shouldn't be held accountable, but you cannot hold only him accountable. He is not the only one accountable for those actions. And it is, I mean, it's very, you know, it's the reason why there needs to be such a balance between the victims driving laws, you know,
Yeah.
and also people who are not victim driving law and policy, right? Because if something happened to my child, I want to say I would be the great abolitionist that I am, and say I don't want them to go to prison and things like that. But I don't know that I would be, because if something happened to my child, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
And I may not necessarily advocate for the things that are going to make other children safe in the future. And I had a friend, I had a colleague actually who was a victim of abuse for a very, very long time. And when they became an adult, they struggled a lot with whether or not they wanted to press charges, because they also had been deeply involved in the criminal legal system and been an advocate for prison reform. And they had had other members of their family who had been deeply, deeply harmed by solitary, by prison, by police, right? And struggled with the whole idea, because they felt that if this person were prosecuted and convicted, that the ultimate outcome of being put in prison was not actually going to make anything better, you know.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's not easy, and I think that's the whole point. None of this is easy.
Right.
Harm is not easy, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the things that we've talked about is, well, it's this recognition that many people may take a look at this work and not, you know, we become virtual rubberneckers when we find out that
Right.
this is a person who's committed a crime, and then we're fascinated when we find that out, and we realize that this is somebody who could have lived next door.
Yeah.
And we see their artwork that emerges from the people that committed these crimes, so the people that are in solitary, the people that are in prison. And, you know, it's that notion of, well, there but by the grace of God go I. It could have easily have been any one of us, and we recognize that we're all part of the same society. But there's also, you know, what we recognize, and I'd like to say that as a trained art therapist, I kind of know what I'm getting into and where I'm going into. And I have learned how to adjust to the work that I've seen. At the same time, I do what I can for my own self-care, and I do what I can to prevent my own sense of feeling overwhelmed by taking all this and carrying all this. But you're witnessing all these experiences, and being such a witness is inherently traumatizing to you as well. How do you mitigate that? Do you create your own art as a way to heal that for you? I know that you, as an artist, and by that, of course, by what you produce, by what you create, you're exploring these very complicated issues. How do you mitigate such, you know, indirect trauma?
Damn, Dave. Oh man, thought this was a gossip show.
We'll kibitz after.
Yeah, I will say, I want to give my shout out to Jessica Ash, who was the drama therapist who
Okay.
co-created, Camp Shine with us. That experience was where I learned firsthand what vicarious trauma is.
Yeah.
I didn't have the tools then. I didn't know. I was doing what producers do, which is like full speed ahead.
Right.
Right. And so, like I said, I formed bonds, many with who I still have bonds with today, of people who lost their children in this shooting, other, children who, survived it, or were there when it happened. And I remember that it got so bad that I was having dreams as if I were there.
Mm-hmm.
And experiencing what I knew of one of the victims. And there had been a story about, one person who had survived, who had passed somebody who had not survived on the way out and was not able to help them. And there was a whole encounter where they talked to the parents, and it was just a very highly, highly emotional thing. And then I started having dreams of that,
Right.
of being that person, of being as if I was the victim. And so emotion was up here and I didn't know it. And, Jessica, and the team were really just like, this is what's happening. Like, this is a very like scientific thing. This is like what's happening. And that was when I was able to start attending my own group therapy with, and luckily it was in Parkland at the time. So the resources were readily available, and so I really learned my lesson there. I mean, it took months after the first, it took months after Camp Shine for me to like recover from it. And so I learned real fast that if I wanted to be involved in this work, I had to be better about it. Nowadays, the benefit is that primarily the work that I do in this space is creative at its core.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the people that I work with, I count as actual friends. And so it is very interesting where, it's similar to what I was saying in Parkland, where it's like, oh, let me show you my new shoes. And here's where I hid from the shooter.
Yeah.
In one sentence. I'll be on the phone with somebody in prison and I'll be telling her about my new dog or whatever. Side note, there's a whole unit of women in Texas who are very involved in my dog adoption process. And now Roxy has become their sister. So that's a whole other story. But yeah, I'll be on the phone with them and they get gassed by the guards at the time I'm on the phone. Or we'll be talking about the dog. And then the next thing you know, we're talking about this write-up they're doing about, horrific sexual abuse that happens behind bars. But it's in that process, it's in the friendship where I'm able to find some solace, as well as in that the actual creation of the things that we're doing with the work is somewhat, I don't want to say it's therapy, but it has therapeutic benefit because
you can say it.
It's I mean, it is, it feels therapeutic, right? Because you talk to people and you hear these stories, you hear, I mean, literally stories about a woman who has mental illness problems and has diagnosed hallucinations. And she's raped in front of people by the guards. And the guards tell her she was hallucinating. Right. And so, and that's not rare, right? Like, as I get into this, you realize this is every day. This is par for the course. This is what happens inside jails and prisons. And so you hear those things and you take them and your hackles go up. And sometimes you do. Sometimes I'm not good at it. Yeah. Sometimes I just cry. Sometimes I bang my desk and go, fuck. And I probably need to be somewhat better about it. But when you hear those stories and then you're able to take those stories and say, now I'm going to turn this into something that will make the realities of mass incarceration and the realities of solitary confinement absolutely impossible to ignore. I don't care who you are. Put this shit in front of Mark Rubio, right? I could put this in front of Ted Cruz. And if you listen to the real voice of this person, you will not be able to ignore what's happening. I mean, policy-wise, they will. Yeah. But that has therapeutic benefit for me because it ignites the fire.
Oh, keep going. That's amazing. I mean, certainly over the past few years, you and I have had many opportunities to look at some of the most horrific imagery done by some of the most
Yeah.
horrific people. And I think both you and I are still able to compartmentalize that and recognize where it's, what its place is and why it's important for us
Yeah.
to look at that. But I would also be very worried if you weren't so overwhelmed by it and if you didn't
Right.
feel a need to break down. Um, so I appreciate that through that all, you're still able to do this work. How can listeners and viewers, see your work and support you and the things that
Mm.
you're doing?
Well, you can call up Netflix and tell them to buy all of our TV series that we're bringing to them.
Yes.
You can call the Mellon Foundation, call MacArthur Foundation, tell them they need to, support artivism work from the Oz Effect. I'm kidding.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. I'm
Yeah,
right there with
we'll
you.
put those
I'm right
numbers
there.
in the notes. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the work I do now is very so we have our TV projects. We have a 3-part documentary series that is coming out next year. Distribution channels, I don't know which ones yet, but
Mhm.
we'll do an update for you. Um, and a lot of the work I do is very artivism based, so it's short term. So last year we produced a mobile museum about solitary confinement and mass incarceration, and it had a lot of immersive exhibits and things. That lives on the bus. There is a forthcoming website for that called the vehicle. I think it's
Okay.
vehicleforchangetour.com. I can
Vehicle for
provide you with that.
Change,
Um,
vehicleforchangetour.com.
mhm.
Okay.
Yep. You'll be able to see the project, the unit, which is the appetizer is this short form audio series that's going to be premiering in June of 2026 at the Unlock the Box. So follow Unlock the Box now, and you'll be able to start seeing some of that stuff is going to largely start to premiere over the summer.
Hmm.
Um, Caged Courage project. It's like I said in the bio. It's hard to get all of the nonsense that I do into one concise place to see it. But
Well, first off,
yeah, you can see some of my past work on ABC or any of these other places. But
well,
yeah, I would
first
say
off,
follow
we've
Unlock
got
the Box.
we've got to correct your language. We're not. This is not nonsense, and I understand where you're coming from. This is all very important work. Absolutely, I think everyone needs to reach out and follow Unlock the Box now. I
Mhm.
follow it on Instagram. That's where I get my updates on all of the work that you're
Mhm.
doing through that, and I support it and share it. Um, and I think what Unlock the Box now is doing about figuring out ways to abolish seclusion and isolation. And of course, you recognize that the language has changed so that people are no longer calling it solitary confinement; they're calling it seclusion and isolation. Um, and
Or
they're
restricted housing.
restrictive housing as a way to kind of because language matters and they're trying to soften it, but the reality is this is what it is. And whether they're placed in there for administrative purposes or they're placed in there for behavioral purposes, the bottom line is that these people are restricted and they're over isolated. Um, and
And it's abuse. And I think that's the thing that is really important for me to help people understand is that solitary confinement, whatever you want to call it, isolation, restricted housing, solitary confinement in the best of circumstances, like if we did it all according to the law, is
yeah,
still considered torture
right,
by the United Nations, by every major human rights outlet. Every human rights outlet, period, I don't care if they're major or not, considers solitary confinement to be torture, right? That's if it's done right. And what people don't
quote unquote,
understand
quote
is that,
unquote.
right, is that what actually happens inside these cells. So, and just back up very quickly. So, the unit is this short form audio series that's intentionally built to feel like the Blair Witch Project. So, it is not intended to be for advocates or people already in the space. It's intended for people who care, who love true crime, who love horror, who love thriller, right? And so the idea of it is that we have these very short form pieces, and what you're hearing is so crazy that you assume it has to be from some horror movie.
Right.
The flip is, so it feels like found footage. It's very grainy, it's very archival. It feels like you've stumbled across an archive of old tapes that your uncle, who was an investigative reporter, had somewhere, and you've stumbled across them. You pick it out, you put one in, and holy shit, you've heard the most batshit crazy thing you've ever heard. it's meant to feel like that. The flip is all of these are real and they happen every day. These are not like I'm picking the most crazy shit that happens ever. These are the things that happen every day. And so when people say isolation is torture, a lot of people who don't experience it or are not justice involved think like, damn, I would love a day to spend by myself.
Sure.
Or what did these people do? Well, one thing is 85% of people are in there for very minor infractions, like having an extra piece of fruit or an extra stamp, or for daring to report a guard for abuse.
Or some people are put in there for quote unquote administrative reasons because they're being protected from others that might be after them. So they put them in solitary because it's easier.
Yeah. And I mean, literally right now, there's a person in prison. I don't want to say their name, but you could look them up. They were a cop. They walked into somebody else's apartment, said they were high and that it was their apartment, shot a guy. And they go into prison and they get protective custody. And they're complaining about being in solitary. Well, their solitary is actually closer to what solitary should be, right? If you have to remove people for protective purposes for themselves or for others, their solitary is literally with 8 other people and a bunch of programming. But they have to be, because they were a cop, and a white nationalist and all these other things, they need to be separated. And just, again, it's the deepest, darkest end of the prison system, but it's not niche. 122,000 people, not including juvenile facilities and immigration detention centers and jails. 122,000 people right now are literally being tortured in the United States. And it's emblematic of the system. And not only that, but it's a pillar that upholds mass incarceration. Because if there is no solitary, you can't have mass incarceration because there's not enough bodies to police the people. And so obviously I could go on all day about it, but I think that the art side of it, when you see what people who come out of solitary create and how they try to describe their experiences in all kinds of different ways.
Sometimes the art is the only way. Sometimes the art, they may not have the words to be able to describe it. And as you saw from that piece,
100%.
she couldn't find the words to explain or explore what she went through. And that piece, I think, captures it. I think we get a lot of those. I think, and what I appreciate is how you have become an advocate and a voice for people who don't have voices, who may not have the voice. You've also become an advocate for all of us. You've become an advocate to see the value of what art can be. What I've appreciated is that you're looking at this from an outside perspective. What you also do, and I'm going to say this as one of my closing statements here as we start to move forward, is that as a producer, you're very much aware of how is this perceived by people outside for the mass consumption to allow us to shape a message so that it can be received by others. And I think that's something I've greatly appreciated. And I think you've helped me hone my messages that I put out there in Art on Trial and the Frenzied Dance of Art and Violence and some of the projects and the works that we've shared. So I think that is by far the most important piece, is that you become the way to translate it so that it can reach the most eyes and the most ears. And that I really have to just underscore how very impactful and important that is.
Thank you.
That is wonderful. Just for within 30 seconds, are there any future projects or any creative endeavors that you're working on, or have you already said, yeah, I've done all that? This is just pay attention online. What's happening here?
Oh, there are a lot of projects happening in the background. So I think, pay attention. I mean, go to the ozeffect.com is our website. It drastically needs a reboot, but we're doing a lot. We are actively working on, phone apps that deal with grief and deal with a living legacy and creating your living legacy and holistic estate planning. We're actively working in using the tenets of creative arts therapy and finding ways to ethically digitize them in sort of non-generative AI ways. And we're doing a ton of things. We're always in something. And I think that hopefully you'll start to see some of these other documentaries and things that feel like true crime. I mean, that's the kind of creative energy that I'm bringing out here is, everybody wants true crime, right? And I'm sort of obsessed with the idea of who has the monopoly on violence.
Yeah.
There's gang violence and there's corrections violence and police violence. They're all gangs, right?
Yeah.
They all serve these purposes. And so what a lot of the work that we're doing right now is finding these bigger mass market, again, Netflix, big podcast style productions that use true crime as the entry point, but turns it on its head to show, hey, the real crime here was state violence, and here's what happened. And so, yeah, that's the sort of the two pieces of creative energy I would say to bring out of this is, if you're not already, challenge your own thinking. Challenge your thinking of who has the monopoly on violence. Challenge your thinking about, do the structures and systems we have in place actually keep us safer? And then look at art. Look at your own art. I think we live in a world, and I'll scream this from the rooftops, we live in a world where American Idol and America's Got Talent, my bad, told us that if you can't sing like Beyonce, you're not a singer. But that's not the truth. We are all artists. We are born. Humans are born to create. This world, when you look at the ancient world, was covered in artwork. And it's not just the faded hieroglyphics that you see. People used to put their kids up on their shoulders and paint the mountains around them. We used to sit around campfires and sing whether or not we could sing at all, and now we sit around a TV. And trust me, I think TV is art. But we are all born to create. So keep creating whatever that means for you. If it's dancing while you walk your dog or singing in the shower, those things, the things that your body is doing while you're creating, are creating really important neural pathways that's going to help you and help the world.
And you said it. It's to create is to be human. And if those inside are creating, we remind ourselves that they themselves are human. They are that's the identity that we're looking for, and that's what we're holding on to, and that's reminds us of who they are. They are us, and we are them.
Yeah.
Jane, I can't tell you this was wonderful. Thank you so much for giving us your time, your energy, and willing to really go deep with some of these explorations. Sure. I'll talk to you next week. We'll do some real gossiping then. But
okay, fine.
Thank you so much, Jane. You were just wonderful.
Awesome. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Creativity Unconfined has been brought to you by Florida State University's Institute for Arts and Art Therapy with the Imprisoned. Special thanks to our producers Sydney Nichols and Malia Burrows, as well as Florida State University's College of Fine Arts. If you like what you heard, and even if you didn't, please support us by liking and subscribing.